This is the chair.
Just want to get started, go ahead.
We are currently on a couple minute delay as we're just waiting for some other committee members, but we will begin in just a moment. Thank you.
let's go. Sorry I'm late, everybody. I had to finish up practice, so.
No worries. All right, all good? All right, so I don't know where your other two committee members are, but because Grant said he wouldn't be here.
Grant's
I
in
haven't heard from
Colorado.
Brian.
Who?
Brian. Oh. Anyways, well, we will go ahead and get started. So I appreciate everybody getting together. Today we want to talk about tax increment financing. So tax increment financing is an authorized method of deferring increases in taxes, property taxes on improved values. Under Ohio Revised Code 5709, 40 and 41, it allows for the redirection of real estate taxes generated by development project to pay for public infrastructure and in some cases private improvements. So we think that this, here's kind of an outline and it's very detailed, so I won't hit on all of it, but pretty much any roadways can be improved, green spaces, water and sewer infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, public buildings, structures, so you could do it, firehouses, different things like that, as well as different streetscape improvements, trees, grates, curbs, newspaper racks, trash, all these different things. Today we're going to be focusing on the 40. 41 is not something that we're proposing at this point in time. 41 is a method where you can utilize the taxes, but it has to be properties that the city has owned at one point in time. So if somebody came to us and said they had a project, it was a property that we previously owned or currently owned, and they needed some additional support to make the project happen, that we could look at doing that. All the projects we're looking at today are under 40. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. Don't you love, I added your picture in after you got to look at this. I thought it would be a nice surprise. You look so good. So I asked if Andrew could talk a little bit just about, let me see, because it doesn't look like, it says I'm sharing my screen, but I don't see the actual presentation. So let me double check. There we go. So I asked Andrew just to talk a little bit about how this is being used in other communities, how it's typically used, areas he's seen it used well, and areas that he's seen it used not so well. So Andrew, I'll hand it over to you.
And please jump in whenever something might trigger a thought or a question. I've just quick background, been in the business 26 years. When I first got into business, this was a new, previous life, I was a finance director, and they used this tool to help build a new interchange on I-75 and supporting match for ODOT. And those were really sort of the first areas that used it. Was mainly for the traditional roadway or sort of public improvements. It's evolved and become more and more widely used. When I first started doing this, nobody would touch them, nobody understood them, how they work, so on and so forth. And back then, you didn't need to even have solicitor approval to go longer than 10 years. And so the law has really changed over time to be a really useful tool for organizations and towards helping to get other improvements done. I think the areas that we've talked about or seen with the city here specifically, it was a good way to capture revenue that could help pay for improvements to help further development. So interchange improvements, water and sewer line improvements, roadway expansions, those types of things. And then when you combine that with possible matches with the state, it becomes even more powerful. So the areas where they've gotten in trouble in the past is what we call an if column. And that's something you don't want to be involved with. Is that you put a big TIF out there and you say, hey, we're going to borrow $10 million, and then nothing happens. Because then that $10 million is going to get paid back somehow. TIF revenues aren't being produced to pay that back. It's most likely going to be backstopped by the city, and that's what
We can comment to that for us.
Yeah.
And you may not be aware of this, don't know that we're talking about it. Regularly, when we do the review, I talk to folks about, we do have multiple tips that we put in place out in 236. There's two components. What we did one for acquiring land out there, one set of debt, and then we did another set of debt for the improvements. At the time, the desire was, the need was for a 3 or 4 lane road decision was made by council at the time, $5 million an additional $1 million. The idea was a developer named Domo promised us a target and a few other things were going to happen out there. We put it in. There were basically 4 separate TIFs put in, I believe. And TIFs have a timing component to them that may or may not talk about here earlier, but something happened along the way when they were put in back in the day. This was before I was your auditor. And the paperwork got filed, started the clock on all 4 TIFs. The idea was the TIFs would recapture, and they said they would recapture the money for the road improvements and everything we did. Well, as I report to you regularly, we've been underwater as of this last year, approximately $2 million on that debt. So we took a big one, as you just mentioned. We paid the debt payments on that, and the difference between what we collected and what we received is $2 million, and we subsidize that every year moving forward. And I had made the argument when I talked to councils past as a position that if we're going to do something like that again, where it's for a specific developer, for specific development, we need to make sure they have skin in the game. And that's what happened in Easton, and that's what happened in Polaris, to make sure the city was not on the hook, there was no risk. I'm not advocating for that at this point in the discussion, because there are not ideas to throw out there that we are doing TIFs to some extent, and we have had experience.
Well, yeah, and so over time, it's a good point. What has happened is for development, maybe just bring Casto as an example. If a developer is coming in and asking for a TIF and then we utilize that to pay for road improvements and things of that nature, it's a common tool now to put in place what they call a minimum service payment agreement with that developer. So something like that doesn't happen. And that simply states that the developer is going to pay, either the debt service if the TIF doesn't produce what they say it's going to produce in terms of productions, or if they don't build what they said they're going to build, then they're going to have to pay the debt service, even if that debt service is higher than the taxes they're currently paying. So those agreements are very common. You referenced Bridge Park down in Dublin. All the developments have really, the communities have really implemented that strategy to protect themselves and really hold feet to the fire.
Could we have done that with sheets? So we put $3 million infrastructure in. Is that applicable?
Well, in theory, there's clawbacks there with the state, right?
So there are already clawbacks with the state. We could have done a development agreement. But actually what we're talking about here, one of the areas that we are going, or that I'm proposing we put a TIF in place is the Sheets property. And once their project is complete, then we will receive a portion of the increase. So we will recoup our funds over a period of time. But in essence, and one of the conversations I'll bring up, not today, but at a later date, is again, how do we layer in utilizing the CRA when appropriate, separate development agreements, and the TIF to both incentivize development but have control over how we spend those dollars and bring those in. And that is something that's been done in the past, not something we've done as much locally recently, and mainly because we just haven't had as large a project, but there are a number of things kind of in the pipeline that most likely I would like to approach in that manner.
What we do is we actually administer the TIF here. So anything that we would do will have a significant role in the agreements, how they're developed, what's done, what paperwork, so that we can make sure that we're compliant, that those things are in place. And that's typical for the physical officer to have heavy in what's happening with any TIF documentation.
And we have already received from external counsel that specializes in kind of incentive agreements, generating a draft ordinance. So following this conversation, then we would be able to, between the auditor and myself, work with the attorney to put forward the legislation. Overall, it's pretty standard language, and then it just acknowledges if they're utilizing a CRA, if there's any components, and kind of where the dollars go first. So, Andrew, other items you want to add at this point?
And I don't recall, maybe in terms of just approving TIFs, there's mainly three ways to go about it for municipality. You can do a 10-year 75% TIF that does not involve school district approval. So you're going to be 75% of the value, the other 25% still being diverted to other municipal entities that get the tax on that. A 30-year TIF takes school approval unless you're going to compensate them 100%. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, what we try to do is when we run these numbers and do the projections, what is the need? And then we go backwards to say, okay, how can we accomplish getting the project done or the incentive done depending on what your goals are? Sometimes you do have to negotiate with the school district for a lesser amount. They depend on the district. Sometimes they do agree to that. There's hundreds of different ways you can compensate a school district to get to that goal. So that's really the main ways of how you create incentives. So,
And what I'm proposing here is the schools would continue to receive, and Van Buren school districts are the ones where all of these will be proposed. They'll receive their incremental increase, so they'll be made whole, and then the other taxing entities just will not receive the increased value.
they call it a non-school.
Before we dive into that, though, Andrew, you've got a plethora of experience. Can you talk a little bit about where you have seen cities most successful in application tips, what type of what we should be looking at? Like those, these are some of the features.
Can you make
I
sure to speak up when you're not facing the camera, just so it's captured on the live stream, please?
Can you, like, some of the things you've seen, features you've seen
Do a
now,
couple
let's say,
directions,
approach?
So they can hear you on
Yeah,
this.
can you comment as to,
You have to.
Yeah.
Still didn't get that.
So some communities have put wide areas in, they know where development's gonna occur. And now, some, unlike what you experienced in the past, you put that TIF in place. It was a definite clock of when the ordinance was put in place, and it started for 30 years then. Now there's TIF districts you can put in place that you decide when that clock starts. So you can say, when vertical development happens on the property on that parcel, that individual clock starts. Now I would say this, it's an auditor's nightmare, right? County auditor's nightmare. Now they're tracking all, could be 100 different parcels within that TIF district. So some areas have done that where they are, somewhat called blanket TIFs in a large areas undeveloped. One of the reasons you might want to do that is, concern over state law maybe changing down the road. Some have been more specific relative to what they call project site specific TIFs, where maybe downtown, you have somebody come in and say, listen, I want to do a hotel project, and that's the only one you're going to utilize there. But in the last 5 years, we've seen these become more and more complicated, where you have maybe different layers. So you might have a CRA in place, and then you might, for 15 years or so, then you overlay that with a 30-year TIF district, and then that would pick up the balance after the CRA. We've even seen now new community authorities in place that would levy a millage charge during the abatement period as if their TIF was there or property taxes were. So commercial, we've also seen them on residential. And I've not seen this in my previous 20-some years, but in the last 5 years, the incentives for single-family residential have been off the charts across the state. It's kind of bizarre. All along I-70, we're seeing it more and more. Communities are coming through there and putting those in place for housing needs or whatever their purpose is. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's something we're seeing happen across the state.
so to enhance that, and I appreciate those examples, one of the reasons that I brought hiring Andrew to this body was we are in the habit of having detailed proposals brought to us, and we're only vetting one proposal. The idea is, as you evaluate this proposal and the concept of TIFs generally, is to use Andrew's expertise and his experience around the state with the development they've done. One, look at what the mayor's asking you to look at, but at the same time, can it be enhanced, or should we be looking at some other areas at the exact same time, or should we be focusing with regard to our strategic plan and doing it a little differently? And he has the perspective to do that. So he is your resource for understanding what TIFs are. He's impartial. He's a fiduciary of the city. He represents the interest of the city as a whole, and he can bring that perspective to you folks and that expertise that generally folks in your position don't have.
So appreciate all that information, because there are a lot of, I think, things that the city of Findlay could be doing that we haven't historically been doing. And I think we'll be bringing those up and having discussions around them moving forward. For today, we're focused on the tax increment financing. And as Andrew mentioned, there are different ways the state law has changed where now you can
put in where it doesn't kick in until there is vertical construction. The majority of the TIFs that we'll be discussing today that I'm proposing are areas where there is no development occurring, and we will be able to enhance it and leverage it to do some additional things within the area. So the legislation will be able to be crafted in a way that supports that and layering. At one point, we were looking at just doing individual parcels, and that is occurring at a couple of spots, but then we also doing the districts, which is able to capture again, that improved value for the region and then be reinvested into that region and things that it gets a little weird in words and things that benefit that region. So it does give you some additional flexibility. So let me reshare my screen here on the live stream.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Are we talking only property tax, not income tax?
Correct.
Okay, not. Okay.
Yeah, and only the difference between, so the property has value today.
Okay.
And as we move forward for the date you put the TIF in place, that value grows. That's the amount we're talking about. So anything above the base value as a.
Which I'll get into in just a minute. Yep, so it's just the increase, so there's no negative impact. So the next slide, if my computer will work, let's see. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Come on, little buddy, you can do it. I have faith in you. Yeah, so under the currently proposed tax increment financing ordinance, all of the taxing authorities that are currently receiving their portion of property tax will continue to receive it. It's the improved amount that will be diverted. Additionally, I'm proposing that the Van Buren schools they'll continue to receive their increased portion. And again, we won't get into school financing. All it does is it doesn't decrease the overall millage and effective rate of the school. So it just goes into the general pot for school money. It is not necessarily increasing the amount of money that the school receives. It's just decreasing everybody else's portion.
And how long would this go on?
So this, what I'm proposing, it's a 30-year period that the tax abatement would be in place. If some of the projects that are proposed would qualify for the CRA, and I'm anticipating that they would receive the CRA. So you'll see that on the number that we've accounted for that abatement period. All right, so the 4 TIF districts that I would like to discuss today are the southwest corner of 9975, which, and I shouldn't go into the Sheets property, Finley Machine and Tool out at kind of County Road 236 and 212, and then the downtown recreation area, that kind of surrounding property.
Quick question on those, on 2 of those, in researching for today, I found that, I don't have detail on it because I wasn't involved in it, but I found a map that says that there's city area TIFs, and it shows one up on 99 and one out.
I think those were areas that were previously discussed. I'm not aware of.
What I'm
any
wondering
other
is, the question is, did another entity do them or not? That's probably something we need to explore as part of the question. Because I don't know, and I don't have anything in file. And I wouldn't, like 224 is the county, so I don't have the county information.
Yeah, we can double check just to make sure. All right, so moving into TIF District 1, 99 and 75. So what I'm proposing is establishing this TIF district. As you guys are aware, there has been residential, multifamily apartments, condos, development occurring out here. Casto is a developer that was recently approved at City Council for market rate and above condos, as well as townhomes and apartments. They are looking to go out here. There are also Blanchard Valley Health System and a number of other property owners that own in this area. What I would like to do is establish the TIF district. Initially, the focus would be on dropping a road down from approximately here down to connect into Midwest Court, and then potentially it will come down here to provide additional access. Because this is an area of undeveloped property where we have multiple property owners, what I don't want to have happen is one person do it first and then not allow for additional access to trade. So this really needs to be kind of a planned development to make sure that we're maximizing the investment in this area. With that, our estimated investment for dropping the road and doing the water and sewer, which then will also help incentivize investment by those other property owners, is $1.5 million. That's for the water line, road, sewer, et cetera.
Excuse me, Mayor, who did that estimate?
Jeremy,
So he has a full breakout of that we could get?
Yeah.
Because I'll need that.
Is
Great.
that property annexed in the city? It is
yes,
city
that's all
property.
in the city. Mhm.
And then on your map, if you could go back one page. Now, I know the piece up there that's not highlighted in the upper left, that's, I think Church owns that. But is Cypher's annexed into the city? Is that-
No, they're farther west.
So they can't,
They were not included here. Their annexation has not gone through at this point, so that was not an area where we were looking to, but we could potentially add them.
how far along is that annexation? A month, 2 months, 6 months?
I don't know if they filed the paperwork, because we told them not to come back to planning commission until they had done that. So I haven't seen anything.
So that's a question, whether it would be advantageous to find out together. Okay, thank you.
All right, so based upon this, Andrew ran all the calculations on layering in, based off of their investment level, they would receive an 8-year CRA abatement, as well as then layering in the TIF. So the revenues that would be expected to be generated to the city would be $20,000 annually from years 1 through 8. And then it would go up to $287,000 in years 9 through 18. Andrew, you can probably explain this better to me. It drops back down from years 19 through 30, just slightly to $276,000. So those are the funds that would be collected. So approximately $6.3 million over the 30-year period. And those would be able to, initially, the city would be able to make the investment to help propel the investment in that area. This only is accounting, these numbers are calculated strictly off of the Castor development. So it does not even include the hotel development that was approved at City Planning Commission at the last meeting, or anything potentially that the hospital would do, or the additional marketing properties would do.
So we invest 1.5 and get 6.3 back over
Yeah.
30 years.
Correct. Plus then, that's again assuming that no other development happens in this area. So it would most likely go up.
Are we talking about capital improvement money? Or general fund?
Well, it goes into the TIF fund, and then we're able to allocate it towards a variety of things as long as we're qualifying. So
Well-
primarily capital expenses.
But we'd be advancing the money, correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so where we need it to come from would be a decision by council, most likely general fund, because we don't have 1.5 out of capital right now free.
What we've done in the past, so that everybody knows that that's an option, is like on TIF on 236, I think we moved the money to capital, paid the expenses out of capital. We also did anticipation notes and things. But that way, any money in the TIF that exceeded the necessary costs came back to capital improvement for future capital improvements, and it would cover any losses you had in other areas if the TIFs didn't create the expense. So that's one option.
Would we borrow money to do this?
That's not very much to borrow. If
No.
I want to borrow money, I'm going to want to borrow 10, 20, 30.
Oh, awesome.
So additionally, you'll see my note at the bottom. Additionally, Casto has said they are willing to do 10 years where they would pay the city or approximately 10 years. We would work through the negotiation where they would pay to the city $140,000. So they would, in essence, they need us to upfront it for their performance, but then they could do an annual payment. So pretty much a payment, minimum service payment, but it would in essence recoup the entire investment.
Do you typically look at the developers, like time in business, their background? I mean, and what is the rule of thumb, 10 years, 5 years? Do they have to have X amount in their portfolio?
I mean, it depends what financing is occurring, right? Some of these transactions have been done through port authorities and bond fund deals. So, and in those scenarios, we're digging down into what are their personal financials. Sometimes they have to personally guarantee some of this.
And typically, we use that port authority pretty regularly, but then there's no clawbacks on the port authority because they're a nonprofit, right? If something were to happen,
Well,
I'm just saying, if we're saying we're gonna take 9 years or 100, whatever you just said,
I'm going to
Well-
push for personal guarantees and stuff.
I'm all for personal guarantees. Oh, you're saying personal outside of the umbrella of a business
Yeah.
entity.
Yeah.
oftentimes that's done that way. It really depends how you tackle the financing. Now, the best way is to get those to sort of backstops and guarantees. And so yes, then we're taking down and everything that they're doing in this case, taxes are really a well-known group, across the state, big organization. But yeah, you do want to make sure you're dealing with
Anything
somebody.
can happen.
The other thing that you do is that you make sure before you outlay any cash at all, that their private financing, their capital stack is in place and committed. Because
So
you're not,
there's a bullet point of items that we should say we want before we.
there it is.
That's
So
a
if I
great
may,
question. Hold
if
on
I-
one second. That's a great question because that is what has to happen here. There has to be an entire package that has all the details of the revenue, all the details of the expenses, all the details of how it's going to be paid, where everything's and that they're capped. Here's the checklist, and then all the compliance stuff afterwards. So in other words, a couple pages of a piece of legislation. This has to be a full financial package so you understand it from start to finish.
So if I may speak about the development, first of all, that's the development agreement is where you're able to put in a lot of that detail because they are guaranteeing to provide financial support. That's where we would be able to do this primarily. Additionally, this project is a little bit different because it would not just, the infrastructure investment is not just going to benefit this individual developer. It would benefit the entire region. They are the first mover, and so they are willing to take on the burden, but it's going to benefit. So we are able to say, listen, you need to provide all of these different items to us to show that you are moving forward. And regardless of if you end up moving forward or not, before we do this, and if you don't meet the guarantees, then you would be able to do it. That has already been a conversation with them that they are aware of and they are comfortable with. So we would work through that. But I didn't want to start negotiating that information and putting it in there on, hey, here are the checkpoints we need for you to move forward until I knew that you guys were going to be comfortable with the TIF because that's an important
Is
part.
this a good deal for the developer?
I'm sorry?
Is this a good deal for the developer?
But it's road.
Yeah, but they're, we're putting 1.5 and getting 6.3 back. If he just put the 1.5 and got a loan,
You still got.
the numbers work
You still got
out.
to pay the taxes. In other words, the taxes, the increased value and the ultimate, the taxes he pays on that real estate development is the same. The thing is, instead of this money going to the county auditor, it's coming to us.
Additionally, the benefit is that on his financing performance, he doesn't have an additional 1.5 expenses. He's able to then.
All right,
spread
so this is
it
a
out
good
over
deal
time.
for him. Is
So-
he asking for this or this
So the
developer?
TIF was something that I brought up because I have heard from
Okay.
all of the property developers saying, well, we're not willing to go and be the one to take on that burden when it's going to benefit the whole area. So I saw this as an opportunity for the city to sit up and be proactive, but then recoup and then have additional funds that we can then make. We can do additional improvements to the 9975 corridor. We can do additional lighting along 99 and 212. We can put some of the funds towards the intersection improvements at 212, 236. All of those things, because they're a part of the corridor that benefit those properties, are all items that we would be able to put these dollars towards.
On the water and sewer side, like typically the developer does the development, and they recoup their costs through Rotary. So that's gonna be eliminated, because there's nobody that has to recoup,
So,
other than the city and Rotary doing it.
so they're still responsible for all of their infrastructure within their property because they're keeping that as a private property within their parcels. Because they're gonna have private drives among, and they'll have their hydrants, they'll have all of that responsibility still, and they'll have all of their regular tap fees and everything. It's just us taking upfront costs on dropping the line.
But the
Making it
Rotary, typically the Rotary, the developer pays to put the road in and all that infrastructure up front, which none of them want to do. And then when they sell a lot, a house, that's when they're recouping their water and sewer
And the
side.
1.5 includes road and water sewer.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, so moving on to the next one, then we can certainly come back and really, they're all structured the same way, they're just different areas. All right, the next one is the Sheets property. Obviously, you guys are familiar with the investment that the city has already made. That property has been closed upon and is transferred to Sheets Corporate. So they'll be breaking ground in the near future on their property. That's roadway, sewer, stormwater breakdown. And this is an individual parcel.
What does that one do? I mean, since we had the state funding and the matching and all of that guaranteeing everything, what's there to tip since we've already covered it?
The increased property value will we recoup
We can
$3.2
still, we
million.
can still do that app even though we used the
Yeah.
something 69, 569.
Yeah, $629.
$629, there you go.
But, so we're not accounting for that. That's still just state dollars going towards infrastructure investment. You can do a TIF on anything that we're not even contributing anything towards.
I just wanted to make sure that there was no.
So what you're proposing here is to capture the 3 million you're investing.
We're only investing 1.6.
Because we did change that one, so.
So we are only investing 1.6 and over the 30-year lifespan, again, keeping the schools whole and them sheets, assuming that they would receive the 10-year 100% CRA abatement, the city would receive $3.2 million
What
over the next 30 years.
What if Sheets doesn't get to 100%? They only get 75.
Then we would get slightly more.
And since this is only one parcel,
Again, you can still use it on anything that benefits the
No.
area.
my other question being is, we picked 30 years. Is that the best for us to go 30, or do we get it more upfront? Lesser. So we talked about 15,
That's a very good point.
so if it's only one parcel.
So if you go 10 years, 75%, you do, in those first 10 years, are able to get more TIF revenue. Problem though is if you're overlaying a CRA on that, then you're kind of hurting yourself, right? So that's why it's better to go 30 years and utilize
Because
CRAs.
of the CR.
Yeah, so sheets will get
Where's
the 100, the
Community reinvestment area.
So,
yeah, so that's a property tax abatement that they'll get being in
Separately than the TIF.
That's a completely separate legislation. Again, something we can talk about at a later date, but that's
If-
what they are receiving at this point in time.
how do we make it here? How does that work?
Well, within the CRA, unless you have your policy says you're gonna make them whole, they're not.
They won't under the 10 years,
Yeah.
however, under the TIF, after the CRA period,
It's two
then
different, you're right.
Van Buren will receive their full.
Yeah. So under the TIF, when they're getting, because the TIF is exempting the value for a certain period of time, whatever is not abated, made in the land, and then whatever, if you have 75% abatement, the other 25% is the calculation, they're still being made whole on that value.
So how long would this one be?
30 years.
So it'd be 30 years. And Van Buren is full on the base amount? Or on the increased amount?
They get their base amount, but on the increased amount that is not abated, they will be made whole.
Not abated through the CRA or through the.
Through the
Well,
TIF.
they won't be.
So
Okay,
what
so
I'm
there,
saying-
so here's my question.
That's correct. You said for the
So-
first 10 years?
Yeah, they will
That's
not be
correct.
held because of the CRA.
That's correct.
So here's my question. If we're only 1.9 in, is that what your number said?
1.6.
1.6 in, if we're only 1.6 in, should we do it where we recapture 3.2 million, or should we back off and take 100% whole?
So
Is that an
plus,
option for us? Hold on, is that an option for us? No, it's
I want
not.
to make sure we're not confusing two things, because
In other words,
under the TIF, you are making them whole.
Okay.
The
Two separate
question is
pots.
the CRA, which you're overlaying on top of this, is do you want to reduce that compensation or have a side agreement with the school district? That is a discussion that you can have.
so there is the option. In other words, because we're actually pulling back. So we have
If the value's
flexibility.
there, right?
so to clarify, under our current CRA, which she is anticipating, our statement is that a property gets a 100% abatement on the increased value, and then it, based off of their investment value, it is for a certain number of years. Based off of Sheets' investment of over $50 million, their CRA would be 8 years or 10 years with the increased value of it. So the school is not losing money, they're just not receiving increased money. And again, the way school district funding works, it goes into a pot of money, so just everybody else's percentage is not going down. There's a very small incremental value of new money that they would receive. In this situation, the school will continue to receive their same amount of money that they are currently receiving for 10 years. After the 10-year CRA abatement is complete, the TIF, as it is structured now, they will receive then that increased amount of money that will go into the entire pot and the incremental money of increase that they would receive. The dollars here are based off of those things happening, the school receiving funds. So yes, we could decrease it and figure out some side agreements to do. I think that that's getting a little convoluted, and I think it's best to work with Sheets and the schools directly if they want to do something like this. Van Buren is aware of the Sheets CRA structure already. And so I think what we're talking about today is, yes, if we want to do a shorter amount of time, that's fine. But I think it's important to state that by decreasing our amount, that does not mean that Van Buren School is going to get the same amount of increased money that we would receive in this situation.
Do you have sheets that shows the breakdown? All those numbers? Yeah, we just.
Yeah, those are the ones we went over with the gym like 2 months ago.
It's fine. There's an important point here is that because of the way this is structured, you could not possibly pay the school more out of the TIF.
Right.
Because under state law, you can only pay them what they would have received. And that's recognizing the abatement on top of the.
So the property that's on the CRA.
If you can speak up so it's recording.
So the CRA, when these companies are being built, the CRA is being established on farm ground with no structure on it. And that's what they're paying taxes on for 10 years.
Okay.
And then after that, they go to the amount with the improvement of the structure on it. And then that we're talking about the TIF for that percentage.
And then my question is on the
Okay.
TIF, does the TIF have to be 30 or can you say it's 25 or 20?
You could go lower. I don't advise that
Okay.
because, once you lock into that, it's really, you're locking the base year based on 25 years. If something comes up, and believe me, every community we've worked with, other projects come up.
Yeah.
And so.
Even on a property where there's only one owner.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they could do an addition, or they could do.
Is Van Buren pushing back on this?
They addressed that real quick. I don't know about the abatement. The abatement law has changed in the last 2 years. Now that you can go 15 years for 75% now without school district approval. Residential, you need to go 15 years, 100% on single family. On the TIF specifically, what is the benefit to the school district? I don't know where they stand with their state compensation, but the valuation is exempted off of their school funding formula. So the state looks at them and says, okay, you don't have $20 more million in value, and if they recognize that, if they're on the formula, and I don't want anyone giving it as full funding, they would be nuts. It decreases their state aid. So as the state goes through every 2 or 3 years and reevaluates how they do that calculation, my opinion is the state sort of looks and sees what they have with their budget and they decide how they're going to tweak the school funding formula. But it is a benefit to have that exempted off the valuation for the school district under that series.
Yeah, so said another way, when you tip it, it kind of pulls it out of the amount of value that the state looks at to determine how much funding they should
It's
receive.
just one factor. I mean, there's many different factors in the school
All
funding.
right, so back to my question, is Van Buren pushing back, or they like this deal, or they don't like this?
I have not discussed the TIF specifically with them. I do not anticipate an issue with them because they're receiving the amount that they're anticipating.
But it will
And
take-
they would receive, again, school funding. They will receive more money in the pot as well as the incremental money once the CRA abatement rolls off. And they are aware and have been at the table for the CRA abatement conversations. That's not a surprise.
I will tell you from the church meeting, we meet once a year, it's a tax executive council.
Who does? I'm sorry.
I meet with council, mayor, county, the schools are at the table, and that's where we review CRAs, things like that. Van Buren's probably one of the most progressive, well, schools, so they will watch, and that's what
And I had informed Van Buren, probably Valley, year has run past, but 4 months ago that we were looking at tipping along there.
What was their,
They said, okay. I was like, okay, no worries. All right, so moving on to number 3. Filling machine and tool, they're currently looking at making an investment. There was a nice article recently about Congressman Ladda's visit out there. They are doing a $50 million project, and over the next couple of years, they plan to do a couple of additional expansions. One of the things, again, some pretty minor things that they approached us and said, hey, we have $150,000 extension of a water line that we weren't anticipating. And I said, well, hey, actually, I'd be interested if you're gonna be making that level of investment, doing a tip in that district, because that could benefit some additional things in that corridor. And so they would ask that we make an investment just to help them with that upfront cost of $150,000. But with the investment, the expected revenues to the city is, oh, and it says 40 years, it should be 30 years, my apologies, that was just a typo. 4.7 million over 30 years. So again, minimal investment for the city of Findlay upfront, but by collecting these revenues, we'll be able to make some additional investments in.
And our investment was what again?
150,000, so yeah, would be requesting.
Can you comment, like, that's a very minimal investment for that type of journey? What are you experiencing in the community campaign with regards to goodwill between involved? We see that a city does make a small, relatively small investment. It's that large.
It's a good deal.
For the city.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
But how about in terms of the goodwill between the city?
When you say other entities. Yeah, I mean, you typically, if you've got the arrangement like you're talking about here where the schools are not, are being held harmless. What sometimes you often see though is the other entities that are losing their revenues. And this varies across the state, because obviously there's a loser in this, right?
Losing revenues.
Well, somebody has to be losing their increased tax revenues, right? So that would be, any of your tax levies are being diverted to the TIF fund. Any special services levies, senior services, children's services, MRDB, those are now being diverted on a commercial TIF. And the counties, it's being
Anything else
diverted.
gets money out of.
So,
Tax, you can add this forward.
Look at my financial summary, Dan. In there, there's a graph that shows a dollar and it shows how that breaks down.
But again, they're not losing money, they're just not receiving it for the increase. And I don't know, it won't let me edit it, but 30 years, so that one's pretty straightforward. And then this one, again, not super exciting. This is just looking at all of the areas around the downtown recreation area that through flood mitigation and the investment in the park will then be most likely for investment in this area. And so I just feel like it's advantageous for us to go ahead and tip on, and then those are funds that we would be able to recoup our investment into those properties, and then the surrounding property. And again, so we would be able to do infrastructure improvements in that whole area, the kind of feeder area, greenscape, road infrastructure, use it buying trash cans, all those little things.
So using it for the park.
Park and the whole downtown area.
Oh, wait. Oh, down south. Why do we have to?
That-
Because that
that-
infers the park would be redeveloped.
No, that just is because that's how Jeremy made the.
So none of that would be in it. then?
None of the actual part, well, it's
Okay.
a, we're not paying property tax on that property anyway, so even if they are included, it doesn't matter.
This, by the way, is a very common practice. We've seen a lot of clients. And so, again, we have seen over 26 years changes in TIF law. Right now, the state legislature and the state house is okay with what's going on. You never know what could happen down the road. There's been discussions, given all the valuation increases and the cry for help related to the 20 mil floor with school districts and taxes going up really high on folks, that TIFs started playing. I don't think that's the case, but one of the things that they talked about is getting rid of extending TIFs for an additional 30 years or really limiting their use. So I think it's important for you to recognize that. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if I was sitting in your shoes, and I was city, because your main driver is income taxes, right? That you're really going to want to make sure you get these things in place. And if you look at Hamilton, Middletown, Springfield, and I go on and on and on, communities of this nature are putting in downtown districts to capture revenue, especially if you've got a park going in, that really should increase the values of buildings around there and see redevelopment happen.
In this case, there's been a lot of consternation in the community. This is all flooded. County spent a lot of money, tax dollars, and they raise sales tax money to generate those tax dollars. And county state pollution none of that ground will be redeveloped, it will be redevelopment.
Mhm.
There could be the perception if we include the park, the actual park footprint itself, that we're setting it up because there's intent to redevelop it at some point.
Yeah,
Or allowing that. So is there any negative, just dropping the park out completely?
it's not gonna matter.
Yeah,
So-
and in my request to Jeremy, those were not included, that he just included them because he took the whole parcel area and it's easier in his mapping system. So obviously, I think it would also be the responsibility of all of us as elected officials to explain that, and they do have deed restrictions on them, so we can put further deed restrictions on them. But, so that would be the goal. It would help offset long-term our costs. I do not have any revenue projections on that because I do not know of any specific investment that is planned for that area outside of the park. But I think it's advantageous for us, again, to be proactive. The Dublin Park is a prime example of how they really utilize the TIF and New Community Authority, which I don't want to get into. New Community Authorities are a whole other animal, which I think we can utilize this best. So what does success look like? Obviously, I think from my perspective, it's taking proactive steps to leverage our revenues, make those infrastructure investments, but also being able to have additional pots of money that we can invest into infrastructure that are going to benefit the whole community, whether it be in the park investments, in improved, roadway infrastructure, not having to pay for certain water line and sewer expansions out of our water and sewer funds, and being able to leverage those dollars. So what does the process look like? So I would like to move forward with these. With no emergency clauses, the districts would be able to move through the process. I would like to get them on our next council agenda if possible. And then obviously that would be contingent upon the auditor and myself getting the agreements or the ordinance nailed down. But we do have an external counsel to provide us a pretty standard language. So shouldn't be too many changes there. Really, I think the development agreement for the $140,000 payment and some of those checkpoints before investment on the 9975 development would be really the only key item that we would need to take proactive action on.
What's the rush before the end of the year to have this started?
Well, Casto, Sheets, and all of those two projects and FMT are all currently moving forward with construction. Well, Casto is awaiting this to be able to secure their funding.
And how many million total between all four?
Of contribution or
For
revenue.
us to put in the infrastructure up
So
front?
9975 is 1.6 million, and then FMT is asking for 150,000. Those are the two financial requests that would be coming.
And then I guess I would like to see the budget for 25 and see how we're going to be putting in these infrastructures and where we're going to make adjustments to cover that, and then cover the maintenance of it. And then if the park comes into play, that's affecting our budget. I mean, there's so many pieces that affect our budget beyond getting money back. I'm not against getting money back. And I had one other question for you that came to my mind, and I'm going to say it all wrong. But throughout the state of Ohio, I remember talking to a charity in the county's auditor's office of property taxes. There's something that's been delaying an increase.
Yep.
And we're looking at probably seeing that next year. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but that change is going to be large increases on property tax. Is that calculated into this calculation of what we're going to get? Because that's going to be quite a bit more, right?
When was your last reappraisal?
I think we're due next. I think next year they start
23.
again. I think it's
23.
next
So
year.
did you see, so you wouldn't have seen really a large increase 3 years ago?
Some properties saw them in the last year where residential side was the bigger focus, that, that people were seeing an increase. I can't remember what is causing it.
So two things. I think you said something else I want to hit on about timing. Is that it's important to get resolutions passed this year because you freeze the base year at January 1 of 24. So you pass it December, you go back to the appraised year of 1/1/24 as your base year. So that's important. The second thing that they may be talking about is what they call the DTE 24 form. And that's been delayed by about 3 years with the Department of Taxation, and It's the form that actually, when you get a TIF in place, you fill the form out, have the property owner sign it. They agree that they're gonna let their taxes go to the TIF fund. It then goes to the state for approval. The state is taking it's bizarre, sometimes several months, sometimes past 3 years to approve these DTE forms, which have never happened this long before in the past.
Now, that doesn't impact our ability to actually,
Doesn't impact your ability to put it in place. It does impact the ability for the auditor will not reallocate those monies until they get that DTE form back from the state.
And also, are you talking about the balancing between industrial, commercial, real estate, or are you talking about that?
I think that was on. It's my head's past thinking.
Well,
But
I
I just
think-
remember recently having conversations
If it comes
about it
up,
at the
let me
beginning
know.
of the year. And I know across the state, they're all anticipating large increases and it's been getting held off for some reason with
That was on the
politics.
residential side with the annual.
Oh, so
appraisals.
only on residential. So we wouldn't see any
So for example,
increases.
in my county, I think we saw 45% residential increases.
Okay.
The commercial side only went up 7%.
So we won't see
I-
much difference.
What I would like to see before it goes to council's legislation, one, I need to have a conversation with Bricker because of the way the legislation was drafted, how different it is from what we did in 256, even though I know some rules have changed. We don't want to be just blanket boilerplate, we protect ourselves in this way, so that'd be good. But more importantly, I want to see a full business proposal. I'd like to see each of the proposals, with each of the detailed revenue breakouts, with each of the detailed expense breakouts, and each of the discussions that we have to have. Because the food state council needs to have a discussion and understand that there are losers in this game. I think you guys need to be very conscious about that, so that when we are taking from Newmer, the EDA, and some of the other groups, it may not be significant. Let's make sure we understand the significance of that. So if we know, no matter how politicians frame it, nobody loses. Somebody loses. It's that simple. We're not politicians here. We're people who take care of the community. And I like to think that. So if we get a full business performer here so that I can review that and see it from start to finish, that would be useful for me. And I want it to be understandable for the public because we now have a group of people who are looking at the information, they're looking at detailed finances, and we want to be able to tell the whole story in again, a business performance. I'm not asking for more than that, but I want no less than a standard business performance.
so you're wanting a full business performance, it's not a easily digestible document. What I have included in these slides is literally the level of detail beyond the site plans from Casto, which were already a public document. And FMT's site plan, which was also already a public document. These other items are saying that we don't know exactly what's going to happen there. I can't give you a full business case. What I can tell you is that these are areas where I expect development in the future. And here is a way for the city to be able to then leverage development that we have made investments towards to be able to recoup our proactive investment into that on behalf of our residents. So I would, when you say a full business proposal, I would like more detail on what you are expecting from that. More importantly, I'd like to know what the committee members and council members are needing to see since ultimately they're decision makers.
As a committee member of strategic plan.
You're not anymore.
Am I not?
Neither
You took
am I.
me off?
Yeah.
You took us off?
Yeah.
Well, okay, then as your fiscal officer, what I want to see is I want to see each of these proposals. I do want to see Jeremy's breakdowns in full. I want to see them as they are today. Andrew's already said he's going to give us his.
You've already
And
already saw
and I
that.
want to take all that stuff and I just want to have it organized and in an understandable format so that we can review it in whole based on your request, put the legislation with it, and then have the other pieces that we're missing. And we should have those pieces in place that we're missing here with regard to how we're going to administer it, what we're going to do, how we're going to follow up, irregardless of those development agreements. So the development agreements are the specifics of what we're going to do. Council needs to understand in whole how we're going to approach it and what we're going to do, make sure we have those things in place. And I think that's a reasonable baseline of what we need to do rather than just slides on the screen, have a presentation package that's complete. So let's call it that if you want to call it a business proposal, but I'd like to see that.
I can put together a breakdown performer. That's what I used to do all the time.
I have two comments, even though I'm not on committee, just a council person. The first three can make sense. The park one, I'm struggling on, because I think we're getting down too much in residential side. So if you did the 3 TIFs, I would also like an ordinance where we're gonna spell out if we're gonna continue doing TIFs down the road, potentially, right? How we want that to look for clawbacks and what we wanna see in those, agreements, if they're gonna pay something up front, if we're gonna require each business to put some skin in the game, and then how we're going to make sure that our I's are dotted and T's are crossed. These are the 5 basic things that have to be in there for council to say, yep, we're gonna be on board for this TIF because we think you're strong enough. We think you're gonna be able to make that payment every year for the first 5 or 8 years. So it's a totally separate thing. That's just an all over umbrella. If we're gonna be doing TIFs, we haven't done them in a while, but typically when we did do them, they're more in commercial, not that. Parks for me and residential, I think there's still an obligation where we have personal developers when they need to do their development, but we don't need to get into the nitty gritty of putting in all that infrastructure.
So, a couple things. First of all, each of these TIFs are a separate ordinance. The individual criteria of how you want a developer to have skin in the game is going to have to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis.
Correct, but there's a baseline.
Yeah, if I can continue. So yes, I think we can put together an outline of what you want council's operating procedures around TIFs to be. I don't necessarily think that's an ordinance though, because that's not a legally binding process. It's criteria for review. So I'm happy to put that together and have that. I just want to be clear, it's a resolution of, hey, this is how we believe future council should evaluate TIFs.
What I'm saying is economic development wise, you're gonna bring a TIF to this council and we wanna see these things in a portfolio. I'm not saying we're saying this much money until you see the project, but we wanna know that they're a strong entity coming in that can uphold their obligation to us.
Yeah.
That's all, and so I think that's a fair ordinance, or maybe it's a resolution.
Yep, and I literally just agreed with you and said I'm happy to do that. I was just clarifying that it's not an ordinance, which is law.
Well,
It is a
resolution,
resolution,
but
which
that's-
is what I just
but
said.
that's,
So the third thing you touched on though, related to the downtown redevelopment area, I think that is the perfect area for it. Going back to one of the things, one, the city is planning to, hoping to make a significant investment in this area that is going to improve the value of that entire region. So I think that it does help by offsetting our costs and helping recoup that expense that again is benefiting the entire area as well as those properties that are surrounding it. So I think it is a worthwhile investment. The next thing is, again, going back to what Andrew had said, related to it pulls those properties out of the school's calculation. So it actually would benefit Findlay City schools when they're going to the state and the state is saying, hey, you need to generate more money in your community. It's actually helping with modifying that calculation a little bit. So I think Findlay City Schools has said they are supportive of TIFs because it does benefit them from that perspective. Now, this area does happen to be residential. And again, it does not increase the property owner's taxes. I don't want anybody to walk out of here and say that it is negatively impacting the individual property owners. It just is, again, not increasing the pot of money that is going to the different entities beyond that. And additionally, well, that's sufficient.
Based on the draft ordinance, I have another concern. If we're gonna say that these things are negotiated case by case, the way the draft ordinance is set up, council won't have any skin in that game. Should water and sewer have a say as to whether or not they are contributing? Shouldn't appropriations have a say as to whether or not a contribution for street is appropriate? In other words, once that's signed and once that authority is given, council has eliminated its authority to be part of those negotiations. And I think that needs to be considered as to whether that should be done.
No.
Yes, that's the way it's written.
Okay, first of all, it's a draft.
I get it.
I literally specifically requested, and you were on the emails, give me an example CRA that we can work off of and modify for our community. So,
No, it's not a CRA, this for the TIF. In other
sorry,
words,
for the TIF
yeah,
agreement, yes.
but my point is, shouldn't council, or does council want a
Okay,
say
but then
in
the
whether
next
they're
thing
spending
is,
it?
all the TIF ordinance is putting in place is that those revenues are being diverted to the city of Findlay rather than to their distributing entities. Any distribution of those funds is going to have to come back to council just like any other appropriation. So implying that council has no ability, no, all council is giving the authority at that point in time is that the revenues are going to the city of Findlay.
That's not 100% correct. I'm not the law director, but when we say we give the mayor the authority to negotiate the agreement, now council has to fund the negotiation that was agreed to. In other words, it doesn't say the mayor's going to negotiate an agreement for the contribution of what's going to happen, subject to council approval. It does not say that. Maybe it needs to say that.
Well, that's actually just language that's going to be removed because in that situation, I think you're looking at the Sheets agreement, CRA or TIP document that he had provided. It's just in the title of the document. And so that won't be included. That would be a separate development agreement. Now, again, in TIP agreements, you could say we're only putting this in place and we will make this contribution. At this point in time, I'm just looking to establish the districts because I would rather just do $150,000 water sewer contribution to FMT and not have it part of the TIF document since it's such a minimal amount, knowing that we will recoup that. So that doesn't even need to be a part of the TIF document. The Sheets, we've already made the contribution, so the funds will just come back to the city. And on the Casto development, we would negotiate that through the CRA. So we shouldn't have meetings after I've already had a 12-hour day, my dear. All right, and then looking at putting that into the development agreement, because again, it's not just a single property owner. So I would rather it be, or since he's willing to make the upfront development agreement payments, it would make more sense, in my opinion. Andrew would say, and you think it's wrong, but I would say have the guaranteed minimum payments of $140,000 and the kind of checkpoint, since he's the first one moving forward for the city's infrastructure investment of $1.4 million being in the development agreement rather than the TIF agreement.
Those things are covered.
Yeah. Very good, thank
Well,
you.
the nice thing is to get it done by the end of the year. You have 2 meetings in December, the last meeting in November. That passes, which means you have the last meeting in October, first meeting in November, to get these details to us, and so that we can see it in its entirety. And maybe it's ready by the first meeting in November, but at least by the second meeting in November. So
Yeah.
you're in one go. But I'd sure like to see the rest of the details on that. Some of that detail I think would be appropriate as well.
Yep, no, I can do that. So we'll shoot for the next council meeting, but more likely the second meeting, second meeting in October. First of November.
Be in November.
1st of November. What year are we in? Like honestly, at this point, what year are we in? The second meeting, our first meeting of November, I have all of the documents, the breakdown of the finances from Andrew, so that's not a problem. But the expected TIF revenues, school revenues, et cetera, as well as the expected revenues, I already have the spreadsheet put together with the payback periods. That's how I calculated it with the spreadsheet. So I will just put together a little bit more additional details to circulate, as well as then pull out some of the language out of the draft TIF agreement. What I would like from you, Jeff and Palmer, you don't have the full committee, but a recommendation I think would still be appropriate to move forward or not move forward, however you are so inclined.
I think so. How many times? Four. So we got. This is
That's all.
missing Brian. We have 3 of 5.
2 of 4.
2 of 4. Is that- This is Robert's. I think we can still make a recommendation. It's just a recommendation. So
And Andrew, thank you very much for coming up here, working with us. Anything else you want to add to any of this conversation from your perspective of things? All albeit what these guys have been talking about.
Tool wise, one last thing I think that maybe you're doing already is that a lot of communities are putting in place these sales tax leases to the port authorities with these developments. Sometimes, for example, you're extending Casto's multifamily out of paying sales tax on the construction materials. That's done through a lease with the port authorities. It's a very common tool being utilized. Some of the money is a benefit to Casto. Some of that money then, or I've seen places where it's 50-50 split, use 50% of the revenue to go towards public improvements. It's a business point you can discuss with them. If you're not doing it already, you really got to take a look at it.
When you bring up a good point, because our county's very upset that they lose small labor. So that would be a conversation to have.
Understood. My recommendation would be that we continue to move forward with discussion, but I think we're gonna have to have another meeting once we get the final legislation.
Okay.
And then, so once we get that, we'll get back together, review the legislation, make sure that it's what we're looking for, and then we can make the recommendations on improvements. So really, I'm not even sure we even need a motion at this point. Josh, you disagree?
I think we necessarily need a motion.
We don't need a recommendation. I
A
think we're gonna-
recommendation.
A recommendation would be, we'll get back together once we get
Yeah.
final legislation.
Yeah.
And that way we'll have a quorum for sure. We'll feel good about life and, we'll go back.
It's good meeting. There's a lot there.
Is that
Very
good?
good. Yep, I will work. I will reach out to you then tomorrow. Hopefully, we should try to schedule that so we can make sure everybody can be there.
Establishing the TIF commits to putting in the infrastructure or establishing the TIF is all the ordinance is gonna say, and that's a separate one for.
So you can do either, but what I'm recommending is just establishing the TIF, not committing to the infrastructure. That would be part of the development agreement.
So you could have a TIF and never move forward on it.
You could have a TIF and just collect revenue without, it's not the right thing to do, I'd say, policy wise, but I've seen it happen.
Very good.
Thank
Any
you,
other
everybody.
questions from the board? For the committee on the board? Going down your path there.
I can't talk.
All right. With that, we'll bring the meeting to a close.
Thank
you all
you.
very, very much.